Attunement is one of the existential structures in which the being sane of the there dwell. Primordially with it, understanding constitutes this being sane. Attunement always has its understanding, even if only by suppressing it. Understanding is always attuned. If we interpret understanding as a fundamental existential, we see that this phenomenon is conceived as a fundamental mode of the being of Da-sein. On the other hand, understanding in the sense of one possible kind of cognition among others, distinguished as explaining, must be interpreted like explaining, as an existential derivative of the primary understanding which constitutes the being of the there in general. Our previous inquiry already encountered this primordial understanding, but without explicitly taking it up within the theme under consideration. To say that Da-sein existing is at their means, world is there, its Da-sein is being in. Being in is there, as that for the sake of which Da-sein is. Existing being in the world as such is disclosed in the for the sake of which, and we called this disclosedness understanding. In understanding the for the sake of which, the significance grounded therein is also disclosed. The disclosure of understanding, as that of the for the sake of which and of significance, equiprimordially pertains to the entirety of being in the world. Significance is that for which world as such is disclosed. The statement that the for the sake of, which and significance are disclosed in Da-sein, means that Da-sein is a being which, as being in the world, is concerned about itself. Speaking ontically, we sometimes use the expression to understand something to mean being able to handle it, being up to it, being able to do something. In understanding as an existential, the thing we are able to do is not a what, but being sane as existing. The mode of being of Da-sein as a potentiality of being lies existentially in understanding. Da-sein is not something objectively present, which then has as an addition the ability to do something. Rather, it is primarily being possible. Da-sein is always what it can be, and how it is its possibility. The essential possibility of Da-sein concerns the ways of taking care of the world which we characterized, of concern for others, and always already present in all of this, the potentiality of being itself, for its own sake. The being possible, which Da-sein always is existentially, is also distinguished from empty, logical possibility, and from the contingency of something objectively present, where this or that can happen to it. As a modal category of objective presence, possibility means what is not yet real and not always necessary. It characterizes what is only possible. Ontologically, it is less than reality and necessity. In contrast, possibility as an existential is the most primordial and the ultimate positive ontological determination of Da-sein. As is the case with existentiality, possibility can initially be prepared for solely as a problem. Understanding, as a potentiality of being that is disclosive, offers the phenomenal ground to see it at all. As an existential, possibility does not refer to a free-floating potentiality of being in the sense of the liberty of indifference, libertas indifferentia. As essentially attuned, Da-sein has always already got itself into definite possibility. As a potentiality for being which it has let some go by. It constantly adopts the possibilities of its being, grasps them, and goes astray. But this means that Da-sein is a being possible which is entrusted to itself. It is thrown possibility throughout. Da-sein is the possibility of being free for its almost potentiality of being. Being possible is transparent for it in various possible ways and degrees. Understanding is the being of such a potentiality of being which is never still outstanding as something not yet objectively present, but as something essentially never objectively present, is together with the being of Da-sein in the sense of existence. Da-sein is in the way that in each case it understands, or, alternatively, has not understood to be in this or that way. As this understanding, it knows what is going on, that is, what its potentiality of being is. This knowing does not first grow out of an immanent self-perception, but belongs to the being of the there which is essentially understanding. And only because Da-sein is its there, understandingly can it go astray and fail to recognize itself. And since understanding is attuned, and attunement is existentially surrendered to thrownness, Da-sein has always already gone astray and failed to recognize itself. In its potentiality of being, it is thus delivered over to the possibility of first finding itself again in its possibility. Understanding is the existential being sane of the almost potentiality of being of Da-sein itself, in such a way that this being sane discloses in itself what its very being is about. The structure of this existential must be grasped more precisely. As disclosing, understanding always concerns the whole fundamental constitution of being in the world. As a potentiality of being, being in is always a potentiality of being in the world. Not only is the world, qua world, disclosed in its possible significance, but interworldly beings themselves are freed. These beings are freed for their own possibility. What is at hand is discovered as such in its serviceability, usability, detrimentality. The totality of relevance reveals itself as the categorical whole of a possibility of the connection of things at hand. But the unity, too, of manifold presence nature is discoverable only on the basis of the disclosedness of one of its possibilities. Is it a matter of chance that the question of the being of nature aims at the conditions of its possibility? On what is this questioning based? It cannot omit the question, why are beings unlike Da-sein understood in their being if they are disclosed in terms of the conditions of their possibility? Can't presuppose something like this, perhaps correctly so. But this presupposition itself cannot be left without demonstrating how it is justified. Why does understanding always penetrate into possibilities from among all the essential dimensions of what can be disclosed to it? Because understanding in itself has the existential structure which we call project and work. It projects the being of Da-sein just as primordially upon its for the sake of which, as upon significance as the worldliness of its particular world. Project character of understanding constitutes being in the world with regard to the disclosedness of its there, as the there of a potentiality of being. Project is the existential constitution of being in the realm of factical potentiality of being. And as thrown, Da-sein is thrown into the mode of being of project. Projecting has nothing to do with being related to a plan thought out, according to which Da-sein arranges its being, but as Da-sein, it has always already projected itself and is, as long as it is, projected. As long as it is, Da-sein always has understood itself and will understand itself in terms of possibility. Furthermore, the project character of understanding means that understanding does not thematically grasp that upon which it projects, namely, possibilities themselves. Such a grasp precisely takes its character of possibility away from what is projected. It degrades it to the level of a given, intended content, whereas, in projecting, project throws possibility before itself as possibility, and as such lets it be. As projecting, understanding is the mode of being of Da-sein in which it is its possibilities as possibility. Because of the kind of being which is constituted by the existential of projecting, Da-sein is constantly more than it actually is, assuming that one wanted to, and if one could, give an inventory of it as something objectively present in its content of being. But it is never more than it factically is, because its potentiality of being belongs essentially to its facticity. But as being possible, Da-sein is also never less. It is existentially that which it is not yet in its potentiality of being. And only because the being of the there gets its constitution through understanding and its character of project, only because it is what it becomes or does not become, can it say understandingly to itself, become what you are. Project always concerns the complete disclosedness of being in the world. As a potentiality of being, understanding itself has possibilities which are prefigured by the scope of what can be essentially disclosed to it. Understanding can turn primarily to the disclosedness of the world, that is, Da-sein can understand itself initially, and for the most part in terms of the world. Or else understanding throws itself primarily into the for the sake of which means Da-sein exists as itself, plus or minus understanding is either authentic, originating from its own self as such, or else inauthentic. The inauthentic does not mean that Da-sein cuts itself off from itself and understands only the world. World belongs to its being a self, as being in the world. Again, authentic as well as inauthentic understanding can be either genuine or not genuine. As a potentiality of being understanding is altogether permeated with possibility. Turning to one of these fundamental possibilities of understanding, however, does not dispense with the other. Rather, because understanding always has to do with the complete disclosedness of Da-sein as being in the world, the involvement of understanding is an existential modification of project as a whole. In understanding the world, being in is always also understood. Understanding of existence as such is always an understanding of world. As factical, Da-sein has always already transferred its potentiality of being into a possibility of understanding. In its character of project, understanding constitutes existentially what we call the Seit-Sicht of Da-sein. in accordance with the fundamental modes of its being which we characterized as the circumspection Umsicht of taking care, the considerateness Rücksicht of concern, and as the sight geared toward being as such for the sake of which Da-sein is as it is. Da-sein is equiprimordially sight existentially existing together with the disclosedness of the there. We shall call the sight which is primarily, and as a whole related to existence transparency Durchsichtigkeit. We choose this term to designate correctly understood self-knowledge, in order to indicate that it is not a matter here of perceptually finding and gazing at a point which is the self, but of grasping and understanding the full disclosedness of being in the world throughout all its essential constitutive factors. Existing beings glimpse sich themselves, only when they have become transparent to themselves equiprimordially in their being with the world, in being together with others as the constitutive factors of their existence. Conversely, the opacity Undurchsichtigkeit of Da-sein is not solely and primarily rooted in egocentric self-deception, but just as much in ignorance Unkenntnis about the world. We must, of course, guard against a misunderstanding of the expression sight. It corresponds to the clearness Gelichtethite, characterizing the disclosedness of the there. Seeing not only does not mean perceiving with the bodily eyes, neither does it mean the mere non-sensory perception of something objectively present in its objective present. The only peculiarity of seeing which we claim for the existential meaning of sight is the fact that it lets beings accessible to it be encountered in themselves without being concealed. Of course, every sense does this within its genuine realm of discovery. But the tradition of philosophy has been primarily oriented from the very beginning toward seeing, as the mode of access of beings and to being. To preserve this connection, one can formalize sight and seeing to the point of establishing a universal term which characterizes every access as access whatsoever to beings and to being. By showing how all sight is primarily based on understanding the circumspection of taking care, is understanding as comprehension Verständigkeit, we have taken away from mere intuition, pure and anchoin its priority, which notically corresponds to the traditional ontological priority of objective present. Intuition and thought are both already remote derivatives of understanding. Even the phenomenological intuition of essences, Wessenschau, is based on existential understanding. We can decide about this kind of seeing only when we have obtained the explicit concepts of being and the structure of being, which only phenomena in the phenomenological sense can become. The disclosedness of the there in understanding is itself a mode of the potentiality of being of Da-sein. In the projectedness of its being upon the for the sake of which, together with the projectedness of its own being upon significance world, lies the disclosedness of being in general, plus or minus, an understanding of being is already anticipated in the projecting upon possibility. Being is understood in the project, but not ontologically grasped. Beings which have the kind of being of the essential project of being in the world have as the constituent of their being the understanding of being. What we asserted earlier dogmatically is now demonstrated in terms of the constitution of the being in which Da-sein, as understanding, is its there. In accordance with the limits of this whole inquiry, a satisfactory clarification of the existential meaning of this understanding of being can only be attained on the basis of the temporalen interpretation of being. As existentials, attunement and understanding characterize the primordial disclosedness of being in the world. In the mode of being attuned, Da-sein sees possibilities in terms of which it is. In the projective disclosure of such possibilities, it is always already attuned. The project of its almost potentiality of being is delivered over to the fact of thrownness into the there. With the explication of the existential constitution of the being of the there, in the sense of thrown project, does not the being of Da-sein become still more mysterious? Indeed, we must first let the full mysteriousness Rätselhaftigkeit of this being sane emerge, if only to be able to fail in a more genuine way in its solution, and to raise the question anew of the being of throne projecting being in the world. In order to sufficiently bring even only the everyday mode of being of attuned understanding phenomenally to view, and if this is to be sufficient for the full disclosedness of the there, a concrete development of these existentials is necessary.